December 11th, 2008. The most trusted man on Wall Street was about to confess the biggest lie in financial history. For 20 years, Bernie Madoff had been running an investment firm that promised consistent returns, no matter what the market did. Celebrities, charities, and billionaires lined up to give him their money. He was a legend, a genius, untouchable. But on that cold December morning, he called his sons into his office and said 7 words that would destroy thousands of lives. There is no innocent explanation. Everything was a lie. Every statement, every return, every dollar. $65 billion had vanished into thin air. The largest Ponzi scheme in human history had just collapsed. This is the story of how one man fooled the world for 2 decades and got away with it until he couldn't anymore. Bernie Madoff wasn't born a criminal. He started his investment firm in 1960 with just $5,000 saved from lifeguarding. By the 1980s, he was chairman of NASDAQ and one of the most respected voices in American finance. Everyone wanted to invest with Bernie. Steven Spielberg trusted him. Kevin Bacon trusted him. Even Holocaust survivor Elie Wiesel trusted him. His strategy seemed simple. He claimed to use a split-strike conversion method that generated steady returns between 10 and 12% annually. When the market crashed, Bernie's clients still made money. When everyone else lost, Bernie delivered. It seemed too good to be true. Because it was. Bernie wasn't investing a single dollar. There were no stocks, no options, no trades. Every monthly statement his clients received was completely fabricated. Every number was typed into a computer and printed on expensive paper. When investors wanted to withdraw money, Bernie simply paid them with cash from new investors. That's all a Ponzi scheme is. For 20 years, he operated from the 17th floor of the Lipstick Building in Manhattan, where his legitimate market-making business ran upstairs. But downstairs, in a separate locked office, Bernie and a small team were running the greatest fraud Wall Street had ever seen. His employees weren't financial geniuses. They were clerks who followed orders and kept their mouths shut. The Securities and Exchange Commission investigated Bernie multiple times. In 1999, financial analyst Harry Markopolos warned them Bernie was a fraud. He literally handed them a report titled, "The World's Largest Hedge Fund is a Fraud," with mathematical proof that Bernie's returns were impossible. The SEC ignored him. They investigated Bernie 5 times and found nothing wrong. How could the most trusted man on Wall Street be a criminal? Bernie's reputation protected him like armor. He donated millions to charity. He served on boards. He advised regulators. When people asked how he generated such consistent returns, Bernie would get annoyed and dismissive, as if they weren't smart enough to understand. His exclusivity made people want in even more. If you questioned Bernie Madoff, you simply weren't sophisticated enough to invest with him. But every Ponzi scheme has the same fatal flaw. It requires constant new money to keep the lie alive. In 2008, the global financial crisis hit. Investors started panicking and pulling their money out of everything, including Bernie's fund. Within weeks, Bernie needed to return $7 billion to investors. He didn't have $7 billion. He didn't have anything. On December 10, 2008, Bernie told his sons Mark and Andrew the truth. They were horrified. They worked in the legitimate side of his business. They had no idea their father had been running a Ponzi scheme for 2 decades right underneath them in the same building. The next morning, they contacted a lawyer. By that afternoon, the FBI was knocking on Bernie's door. Bernie answered in his bathrobe and slippers. When agents asked if there was an innocent explanation, he said no. "I paid investors with money that wasn't there," he admitted calmly, as if he were discussing the weather. He was arrested on the spot. The man who controlled $65 billion was led away in handcuffs like a common criminal. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. Hedge funds collapsed overnight. Charities that relied on Bernie's returns shut down. Ordinary people who had trusted Bernie with their retirement savings discovered their accounts were empty. Everything was gone. The Elie Wiesel Foundation for Humanity lost $15 million. A 90-year-old widow lost her entire life savings of $7 million. Investors lined up at bankruptcy court hoping to recover something, anything. The trustee appointed to liquidate Bernie's firm faced an impossible task. There were no assets to distribute, no stocks to sell. Bernie had spent decades sending out fake statements while spending investor money on yachts and penthouses. Some victims committed suicide. Marriages ended. Families were destroyed. All because one man decided he could lie forever. Bernie's wife Ruth claimed she had no idea. His sons claimed they were innocent. His brother Peter, who worked at the firm, was arrested. Federal investigators tore through every document, every computer, every bank account. They interviewed hundreds of employees and investors. What they discovered was even more shocking. Bernie had been running the Ponzi scheme since at least the early 1990s, possibly earlier. The money wasn't invested, it was spent. Bernie lived in a $40 million penthouse in Manhattan. He owned homes in France and Florida. He had yachts, private jets, and a collection of expensive watches. He gave millions to his family and friends. And when investors asked for their money back, he simply used new investor deposits to pay them, creating the illusion everything was fine. On March 12, 2009, Bernie Madoff stood in federal court and pleaded guilty to 11 felony counts. He admitted to running a Ponzi scheme that defrauded thousands of investors out of billions of dollars over decades. The judge asked if he understood the charges. Bernie replied calmly, "Yes, Your Honor, I understand." 3 months later, at age 71, Bernie Madoff was sentenced to 150 years in federal prison. The judge called his crimes extraordinarily evil and said Bernie had carried out his fraud with a cool detachment from the suffering he caused. Bernie showed no emotion, no apology, no remorse. He simply nodded and was led away in handcuffs. His victims filled the courtroom. Some screamed at him. Others cried. One man shouted that Bernie had destroyed his family. Bernie didn't look at them. He stared straight ahead as if none of it mattered anymore. The game was over. He had lost. His wife Ruth was forced to forfeit $80 million. His sons were investigated relentlessly. Mark Madoff committed suicide 2 years later on the anniversary of his father's arrest. The trustee working to recover funds for victims spent years tracking down money. By 2025, he had recovered over $14 billion. But thousands of investors still lost everything. Charities closed. Families were torn apart. Lives were ruined. Bernie Madoff died in federal prison in April 2021 at age 82, still serving his 150-year sentence. So how did he get away with it for so long? The answer is simple and terrifying. People believed what they wanted to believe. Bernie's reputation made him untouchable. His exclusivity made people desperate to invest. And his consistent returns silenced anyone who questioned him. The SEC failed. Auditors failed. Investors failed to ask basic questions. Everyone assumed someone else had done the due diligence. The Madoff scandal changed Wall Street forever. New regulations were passed. The SEC reformed its investigation processes, but the real lesson is darker. Trust, when misplaced, can be the most dangerous weapon in the world. Bernie Madoff proved that with the right reputation, you can lie to everyone, steal billions, and get away with it for decades. Until one day, inevitably, the money runs out. And when it does, the truth comes crashing down like a house of cards. $65 billion, 20 years, thousands of victims. One man's greed destroyed more lives than most criminals could in 10 lifetimes. This was Bernie Madoff, the man who turned Wall Street into his own personal casino and made everyone else pay for his chips. The scheme was brilliant in its simplicity. Bernie didn't use complex derivatives or exotic financial instruments. He just lied. He printed fake statements. He forged documents. He kept two sets of books, one for regulators, one for reality. His clients never suspected because they never saw the trading floor. They only saw the monthly statements showing profits. Always profits. Bernie's secret weapon was his legitimacy. He had founded one of the first electronic trading platforms that eventually became NASDAQ. He was a pioneer in computerized trading. Regulators consulted him. Congress listened to him. Who would suspect a man like that? That's exactly what Bernie counted on. His public success gave him private cover to commit the greatest theft in American history. The warning signs were everywhere. Bernie's returns were too consistent, too perfect. Markets don't work that way. Ever. His auditing firm was a tiny operation run out of a strip mall by a 78-year-old accountant with 3 employees. Major investors who did their homework refused to invest with Bernie. They couldn't figure out how he was making money. Because he wasn't, but greed is a powerful drug. When your friends are making 12% returns every year, you don't ask questions. You just want in. Bernie's fund became a status symbol. Getting accepted to invest with Bernie Madoff meant you had arrived. You were part of the club. Country clubs competed to have Bernie speak. Charities begged him to manage their endowments. Everyone wanted a piece of the Bernie magic. What they didn't know was that the magic was just smoke and mirrors. Behind the mahogany desk and the expensive suits was a desperate man. Bernie spent every day knowing the scheme could collapse at any moment. One big withdrawal request. One serious audit. One question he couldn't answer. He later admitted he lived in constant fear, but he couldn't stop. Stopping meant confession. Confession meant prison. So he kept going. His employees helped him, knowingly or not. Some definitely knew. They created the fake statements. They backdated trades that never happened. Others may have suspected but chose to look the other way. The paychecks were good. The job was easy. Why rock the boat? This is how fraud spreads. Not through evil masterminds, but through ordinary people who convince themselves they're not really doing anything wrong. Bernie's sons worked in the legitimate side of the business. They ran the market-making operation that actually traded stocks for real clients. That business was profitable and completely legal. It gave Bernie the perfect cover story. He had a real business to point to when questioned. But downstairs, behind a locked door that even his sons couldn't access, Bernie was operating the criminal enterprise that would eventually destroy everything. The final months were chaos. As the 2008 financial crisis deepened, redemption requests poured in. Everyone needed cash. Everyone wanted out. Bernie knew the end was near. He tried to raise new money but couldn't. He considered running but had nowhere to go. On December 9th, he told his employees to expect their year-end bonuses early. He knew it would be the last money he could distribute before everything collapsed. The next day, he couldn't keep up the act anymore. He called his sons to his apartment. His wife Ruth was there. "I'm finished," he told them. "It's all been one big lie." His sons were devastated. Their entire lives had been built on their father's reputation. Now they learned it was all fraud. Everything they thought they knew about him was false. Their father wasn't a genius. He was a criminal. When FBI agents arrested Bernie the next morning, he almost seemed relieved. The weight of the lie had finally become too much to carry. He cooperated immediately. He explained the scheme in detail. He answered every question. But he refused to implicate anyone else. Bernie insisted he had acted alone, that no one else knew. Investigators never fully believed him, but they couldn't prove otherwise. His guilty plea came quickly. Bernie didn't want a trial. He didn't want his victims to suffer through months of testimony. Or maybe he just didn't want the world to hear the full details of how he had stolen from Holocaust survivors and cancer charities. Either way, He pleaded guilty to all charges and accepted his fate, 150 years in prison. He would die behind bars. The victims' impact statements were heartbreaking. Elderly people who had lost everything. Charities that had to close their doors. One woman described how her husband had committed suicide after learning their retirement savings were gone. She blamed Bernie for his death. Bernie sat and listened. He showed no emotion, no tears, no apology. Just a blank stare as if he couldn't quite believe it had all come to this. In prison, Bernie gave a few interviews. He tried to explain himself. He said he'd gotten trapped and couldn't find a way out. He claimed he'd planned to end the scheme after one good year when he could cover all the losses. But that year never came. Instead, the losses grew larger, the lie grew bigger, and Bernie kept digging the hole deeper until it swallowed him whole. His death in 2021 barely made headlines. The man who had once commanded billions was now just another dead prisoner. His wife Ruth lives in Connecticut, estranged from most of her family and former friends. She lost everything except a small allowance. Bernie's surviving son Andrew died of cancer in 2014, estranged from his father. The Madoff family was destroyed as completely as their victims' finances. The trustee recovering money for victims has done remarkable work. $14 billion recovered. But $30 billion is still gone forever. That money was never invested. It was spent, consumed, vanished. You can't recover what never existed in the first place. Thousands of victims received only pennies on the dollar. Their trust was betrayed. Their lives were shattered. And justice, when it came too late. The Madoff case exposed fundamental weaknesses in the financial system. How could one man steal $65 billion over 20 years without anyone noticing? The answer is uncomfortable. People in power didn't want to know. Asking questions meant risking access to Bernie's golden touch. Financial advisors who funneled clients to Bernie earned massive fees. They had no incentive to investigate. They just collected their commissions and looked away. Some of these feeder funds lost billions when Bernie's scheme collapsed. Their investors sued them for negligence. Many went bankrupt, but the damage was done. Entire fortunes had been wiped out, retirement plans destroyed, college funds evaporated, all because no one asked the obvious questions. How did Bernie sleep at night knowing he was destroying thousands of lives? He later said he compartmentalized. He separated his crimes from his identity. During the day, he was Bernie Madoff, Wall Street legend. At night, he was just a man with a terrible secret eating him alive. His wife Ruth said she had no idea about the fraud. Many people don't believe her. How could she not know where all that money came from? Bernie's lavish lifestyle required millions of dollars every year. The penthouses, the yachts, the private jets. That money came from somewhere. Ruth claimed ignorance, but investigators found she had withdrawn $15 million in the weeks before Bernie's arrest. Coincidence? Maybe. Maybe not. She was never charged with a crime. She forfeited her wealth and now lives quietly, one of the most hated women in America. Bernie's brother Peter pleaded guilty to falsifying documents and was sentenced to 10 years in prison. He served 9 years before his release. Several employees were also convicted. They received sentences ranging from 2.5 to 10 years. Bernie's inner circle went down with him. But the masterminds who helped Bernie recruit billions of dollars worth of investors, most of them walked away free. They claimed they were victims too. The human cost of Bernie's fraud cannot be measured in dollars alone. Families were torn apart, friendships destroyed, suicides committed. One investor, Thierry de la Villehuchet, locked himself in his office and slit his wrists after losing $1.5 billion of his client's money. Another investor, William Foxton, shot himself after losing his family's fortune. His son later said Bernie had murdered his father with his lies. These weren't just numbers on a balance sheet. These were real people, real lives, real suffering, and Bernie knew it. He just didn't care enough to stop. In one of his prison interviews, Bernie said his biggest regret was getting caught. Not the fraud itself, not the people he destroyed. Getting caught. That statement reveals everything you need to know about Bernie Madoff. He wasn't sorry for what he did. He was sorry he couldn't keep doing it. Some psychologists believe Bernie is a sociopath, someone incapable of feeling empathy or remorse. Others think he's just a coward who got in too deep. Either way, the result is the same. $65 billion stolen, thousands of lives ruined, and one man's name forever synonymous with greed and betrayal. The Madoff scandal changed how the financial industry operates. New rules require independent custody of assets, more frequent audits, greater transparency. But rules only work if people follow them, and people only follow rules if they're enforced. The SEC failed to enforce the rules they already had. 5 investigations into Bernie Madoff. 5 times they found nothing wrong. 5 times they walked away satisfied. How is that possible? Incompetence? Negligence? Or something worse? Some believe Bernie had connections that protected him. Friends in high places who made problems disappear. No evidence of conspiracy was ever found, but the questions remain. How did Bernie fool everyone for so long? Was he really that good? Or was someone helping? We may never know the full truth. Bernie took many secrets to his grave. His employees who went to prison kept their mouths shut. The omerta of Wall Street. What we do know is this. Bernie Madoff exploited the one thing every con artist relies on: trust. People trusted him because other people trusted him. It's called social proof. If everyone else thinks Bernie is legitimate, he must be legitimate. Right? Wrong. Dead wrong. Bernie understood human psychology better than most. He knew that people don't invest with their brains. They invest with their emotions. Fear of missing out, desire to belong, greed for easy money. Bernie pushed all the right buttons and people lined up to hand him their life savings. The exclusive nature of his fund made it even more attractive. You couldn't just invest with Bernie. You had to be invited. You had to be special. This artificial scarcity created massive demand. People begged to get into Bernie's fund. They used connections. They paid referral fees. They did whatever it took. And Bernie let them in, one by one, until he had trapped $65 billion in his web of lies. And then the music stopped. The 2008 financial crisis was Bernie's undoing, but it would have collapsed eventually anyway. All Ponzi schemes do. The math guarantees it. You can't pay old investors with new investor money forever. Eventually, you run out of new investors. And when you do, the whole thing implodes. Bernie's only mistake was waiting too long. If he had confessed in the 1990s, the damage would have been millions, not billions. He kept going. He kept lying, kept stealing, kept destroying lives. Because stopping would have meant admitting he was a fraud. And Bernie's ego couldn't handle that. In the end, Bernie Madoff wasn't brought down by investigators or whistleblowers. He was brought down by his own greed and the laws of mathematics. His legacy is one of destruction. Families ruined, charities closed, trust shattered. He took the American dream and turned it into a nightmare. Wall Street will always remember December 11, 2008 as the day the biggest lie in financial history finally came crashing down. Bernie Madoff thought he was smarter than everyone else. He thought he could beat the system. He thought he could lie forever and never get caught. He was wrong. And his punishment was spending the last 12 years of his life locked in a cage, despised by the world, abandoned by his family. Some say justice was served. Others say no punishment could ever be enough for what Bernie did. Both are probably right. The only certainty is this: Bernie Madoff's name will live in infamy forever. cautionary tale, a warning, a reminder. That trust, once broken, can never be fully repaired. That greed, unchecked, destroys everything it touches. And that lies, no matter how carefully constructed, always eventually collapse. This was Bernie Madoff, the man who stole $65 billion, the man who destroyed thousands of lives, the man who proved that on Wall Street the biggest crime isn't getting caught. It's getting away with it for 20 years while everyone watches and does nothing. Until one day, there's nothing left to steal. And the house of cards finally falls.